Th- Thank you for having us.
Well, good evening, everybody. We're going to just give it a minute for people as they are continuing to stream in, which I'm not surprised that so many people are streaming in because this is a topic that is near and dear to all of our hearts, I'm sure. So welcome, welcome. Just give it another minute and then we'll get started because we have a lot to talk about. Still coming. It's great to see so many of you tonight while it's still daylight. Yay. All right. Well, I think we should go ahead and get started as people are coming in. Welcome to the October Connecting Families, which is sponsored by the Federation for Children with Special Needs. We're so excited to have you here. This is another opportunity for us all to connect and to share information and common experiences and problem solve together. And tonight's topic will not disappoint, I'm sure. My name is Elizabeth Bostic, for those of you who don't know me. And we are joined this evening by Sheilah Gauch, who is going to help us to understand how to identify and cope with caregiver stress and trauma. And before we get started, I do want to make a couple of notes. We are recording this evening's session, so if you don't want your face on the screens, that is absolutely fine. You can take yourself off camera. There will be a link placed in the chat if it hasn't already been done so. So if you have a need for interpretation services, there will be a link to Wordly, which will allow you to be able to choose the language that will meet your particular needs. Sheilah has a lot to go over today. I will be working on keeping track of questions as they come into the chat, as will Pat and Melanie. And we will do our best to address as many of them as we possibly can. And those that we're not able to today, as always, we will compile those and answer them and include them with the recording when we upload it to the website. And of course, at the end of our session today, then we'll have a few other announcements for upcoming events and resources that are available to you while you're here. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Sheilah, who is here with multiple roles, and she will actually tell you a lot about her personal and professional background. But I think in this particular case, she is leading with a caregiver of two complex kids, as I recall, and the stresses and the trauma that's associated with this. So how do you identify that? Though I imagine many of us may not have difficulty at that point. But how do you identify with it? And what are the tools you can use to cope with caregivers' trauma and stress? So Sheilah, thank you so much for being here with us on this very important topic.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to have been asked. This is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart, and I feel like I've really dug into it as a result of my own experiences as a caregiver of two children with pretty complex needs, pretty significant mental health needs that were ultimately diagnosed as PANDAS. So I have really wondered about my own experience and kind of some of my own reactions as a caregiver, and really kind of dug into the research and talked to other trauma therapists and really talked about kind of what this was. So this presentation, I'm going to start sharing my screen, is beep, beep. Let's see. Okay. So this presentation is usually like an hour and a half. So I have pared it down. I'm going to try to talk quickly, not quickly. I'll try to talk moderately through it so people can understand and hear me. And I find this to be something I'm incredibly passionate about because I think, well, for a variety of reasons that we'll talk about as we go through. So just some of the quick goals. I think most people don't see it as trauma, the level of stress caregivers have. And so I'm going to talk about why it is. I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of background, kind of a little bit of a quick neuroscience of like what's happening in your body and why this is presenting as trauma. We're going to identify kind of barriers and obstacles that really, I think, complicate it. I think this type of trauma is really sneaky. I think it sneaks up on all of us who are caregiving because we're also parenting. And then we're going to try to find some different ways to support. So you all know why it matters. I feel like I have historically loved being invited to speak at the Federation. I myself was a co-chair and a chair of my local CPAC for about 5 years. I am passionate about special education and mental health, and the intersection of all of that and kind of how we care for caregivers so that they can continue to care for their children. So we know it matters. The Surgeon General just put out a big initiative on, making sure we're taking care of caregivers and calling for, a reckoning with how our caregivers' mental health is suffering. So we know how important we are. I don't even have to spend a lot of time on that. But why is it so hard to see as trauma? I do a lot of this work at the school I'm at, Dearborn Academy. And what we found, kind of servicing caregivers who have complex, the population at Dearborn Academy is students with significant mental health and learning challenges. So, and I will say, I think that this goes to any kind of caregiving a complex child. So not just mental health, medically complex children. Like I know there are lots of different, I kind of got some of the questions. So I know there are a lot of different people joining, and I think it's a broad enough umbrella we all join in under, right? But I think we do a lot of this work. What we were finding was in order to support our students in healing, we had to support the caregivers, and we were missing them. And so we put in a lot of work to identify different ways to scaffold them and support them, including like a 10-week trauma group. We put in a really robust intake system where we're actually just asking caregivers about themselves, not about their students, but like, how are you? And what can we do for you? And I will say I've gotten a lot of great information from the caregivers I work with every day. They are some of the bravest, most courageous people I know. And I'm kind of grateful to be able to be part of the school I'm at right now. And we talk a lot about why it's hard to see as trauma. And the caregivers really identify, like we run a caregiver trauma group, and they all say like, well, I don't know if it's trauma. And part of that, these are some quotes from some of our caregivers. It's your parenting, right? And when you have complex needs in your house and you're trying to care for your children, really the world just says you're parenting. And the reality is you're caregiving a child with really significant needs, and the impact on that is on you is significant. And it's also hard just to take time for you, because like you're caring for your child. That's the most important thing in your life, right? So I kind of think of it, and maybe this isn't a great analogy, but it's like that frog in a boiling pot of water, right? They have that analogy where like the frog kind of sits in a pot of water, and then you turn up the heat, and they don't even know that they're boiling until it's too late, truthfully. And that's where it's really kind of, it's what we're all swimming in all the time, all day long. It's not like there's a respite, because you love your children, you're caring for your children, and yet this level of stress keeps kind of coming. So these are just, some other quotes from caregivers that we've heard. It's incredibly isolating. It's incredibly lonely. The despair, the frustration, just feeling helpless. I mean, I often say, we as caregivers, whether you're parenting a biological child or adopted child, you're parenting a grandchild, whatever your role as a caregiver, your one goal in life, your one role is to keep your child safe, right? And so if anything's happening that's impinging on that, that's incredibly stressful. And I think what I really noted when I started to dig into the research is there's not a lot of research on it, to be honest. There's a lot of research on caregiving older adults. There's not a lot of research on caregiving, what it's like to raise children with complex needs, and why I just feel so strongly about kind of doing this work and getting this information out there. So I'll just kind of, I usually have multiple slides on this, but I'm just going to mark the moment and say with one slide and say, truthfully, I think part of what makes it really hard to see this is caregiver stress and trauma, and likely why it's not talked about or researched that much or well understood is our history with caregivers and kind of how we view caregivers throughout history. So certainly in the mental health world, there are lots of different terms we've used that thankfully have gone by the wayside. We used to use terms like schizophrenic parents for mothers who caused their children schizophrenia, or refrigerator mothers were mothers of children with autism. They were so cold they caused their children's autism, right? We have terms like hysteria. We used to have a whole movement on the books of eugenics where we would force sterilize anyone, who had a disability. Like, we have a really not so great history of how we understand parenting and caregiving globally. And I think that really complicates how we move through this. I think there's a lot of caregiver blame and shame that happens, even inadvertently. It's just kind of like the water we all drink, unfortunately, is that of often attributes blame if children are not improving to kind of what a parent could do differently, or how they could access treatment differently, or could they ask for help differently. So I just kind of name that as like an overarching. I think that's a significant piece to note. Just the language we use is pretty challenging. I love this quote that post-traumatic stress disorder in combat soldiers is receiving greater attention. Doctors and researchers are trying to do the same for a group with similar symptoms, parents of children with life-threatening medical conditions. And so when I say life-threatening medical conditions, I think it can be anything that impinges upon your child's health and well-being. So whether that's mental health or medical, I truthfully think mental health is medical, and I lead with that. It is a physical disability. We seem to want to frame it differently, but I don't. So I'll put it right in there with any sort of physically disabling issue. So what exactly is trauma? Trauma results from an exposure to an incident or a series of events that are emotionally disturbing or life-threatening, with lasting adverse effects on an individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, and or spiritual well-being. So it can result from anything, I mean, truthfully, that you are dealing with your child. Like, maybe you have an incident where you had to take your child into an ER, or you spent time on a medical unit, or I know someone in the group who messaged had, I think, a child with type 1 diabetes. That's incredibly stressful, right? Like, their insulin levels are dropping. So it can be anything. And truthfully, I think you saw that frog in a pot of boiling water. It's like you are literally living in it all day long, because likely there are stressful events happening on a daily basis as you're trying to care for your child. So I just like to break it down. This is kind of how I know at Dearborn we try to give the whole staff team this language of like what happens when you're having a stress reaction, because I think it helps to understand that this is not just all happening in your head. It's just not. It's happening in your head. It's happening in your body. It's a really physiological reaction to significant events that are happening in your life. So if you're caring for a child with significant needs whose life may be, in jeopardy, I know for myself with both my children, I did feel like my life was in jeopardy, or their lives were in jeopardy because of how severe their symptoms were. So if we think, it all starts with a physiological response to a super primal survival mechanism. So all of us have it, every single one of us. We all react differently when stress hits. Our bodies just have different reactions. And the reactions are usually in the form of fight, flight, or freeze. So if your body perceives that it's being chased by a lion, that's not a lion. I don't know what it is, but let's just pretend it might be a lion. When your body perceives it's being chased, the brain actually, there's a part of your brain called the amygdala, which is part of your limbic system, It's the alarm system in your brain, and it says, danger, 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 get moving, okay? And it sends out a cascade of stress hormones into your body. And your body, depending on how it reacts, will react it predictably in one of these three ways. So for me, my go-to reaction is I'm a fighter. Like I am like, you are going to see me. I am the mom that my kids are now in college, but when they were in high school, like my first response was I was going to come at it, and you might get a 10-page email from me. I would have to slow way down, to be honest. I learned to slow down, but it was hard for me because that's my first reaction is I'm going to turn and start fighting the lion, right? However, if my stress response is too prolonged for too long, I'm going to freeze. I'm going to curl up like a pill bug. I'm going to roll under my dining room table, and someone's going to have to come find me because I'm done. Like I am now overwhelmed and I can't move. But these are really adaptive things that are happening to your body. When you feel stressed, when you get a call from the school, or your child's in an ambulance headed to, the ER because they're in a medical crisis or a mental health crisis, your body will react in one of these three ways because you are perceiving that your child is in danger, and therefore, truthfully, you are in danger because they are your child. You're caring for them. So I just like to frame it as this. It's a very physiological response. It is exactly what our bodies are designed to do when we perceive stress. Oh, I don't know why it does that. Literally, my Zoom does that. It like gives myself a thumbs up. That's weird. Okay, so I love this particular slide, which is the polyvagal theory of a trauma response or a stress response. It just does such a beautiful job of illustrating what's happening in your body and brain when or in your nervous system, I should say. So you can see like fight or flight is here in this yellow zone. Freeze is actually total shutdown. So when you're frozen, like your body is overwhelmed with fear. And it's there's a very physiological response that's happening. Like this is actually happening to you. And I think for a long time for me, I was rolling through stress responses, and I was kind of having this really intense fear-based response, and I wasn't understanding why all of these different things were happening. And this actually really helped me understand that kind of all the significant things that happen when your sympathetic nervous system is engaged, right? When that fight or flight, when you're either trying to run from a lion or you're trying to fight the lion, like you can see kind of increased blood pressure, heart rate. But when you're in shutdown and collapse, everything slows down, like everything. So it's just, and you can see where are we all supposed to be in the green with social engagement, which is kind of the last place a lot of us end up because we're so isolated and alone, and the importance of that we'll kind of keep talking about. So, I actually went and at some point when I was doing my research on caregiver stress and trauma, I went and found one of my dear friends who's an expert trauma therapist. She's part of the Complex Trauma Institute. And I said, can you help me? Because there's something about this that it looks really different. This type of caregiver stress and trauma, it feels different to me. And I think because it's so constant, it's happening so consistently. And I'm not sure why people aren't talking about it. And she really led me to kind of this idea of we're all, if we think of ourselves as a typical, this is kind of trauma therapy 101 sort of. If you're in typical conditions, you're driving down a highway, and the way our bodies and brains respond to surveying danger is that we observe, we input, we interpret what's happening, we process it, we evaluate all our options, we plan, we act. That's what we're supposed to be doing when we're kind of, when we're just driving down the road. And this is just how our brain operates in typical conditions. But when we have a stressful event, when the alarm system, when that amygdala and that limbic system is activated and it sends out this danger response that you have to get ready and prepare, things we lose part of our typical processes, right? We can no longer interpret, process, or evaluate or plan. We're just going from observing and acting. So we're kind of going straight to like trying to problem solve, or like with me, like I'm going straight to writing my 10 paragraph email to all my special ed team to make sure that they take care of my children. And what happens when that goes on for too long, and a real trauma-based response, is that you get stuck and you're no longer able, your body, your brain literally tells the body immediately, I got to act. I just got to act. So you're losing kind of these really key pieces to those brain processes. And that's really important to note, because that's why, like, we have to understand what's happening in our body and brains so that we can then take care of ourselves, because we're really worthy of being in the moment and trying to, like, I'm really worthy of not sending that 10 paragraph email that just took me probably 3 hours to create because I'm so stressed, and figuring out how I can regulate my nervous system so that I can care for myself as well as my child, right? And it's incredibly hard. So, and, you know, part of it is when we have that stress response, when the amygdala fires off and it tells our body we're in a stressful situation. So I could think of, I've had I have many different points in my caregiving career where I have felt so stressed, whether it's getting a call that my 11-year-old is being sectioned to the ER from school, right? Like, that is a stressful situation. And my body, your body and brain remember those instances to protect itself, because we also have the amazing ability to future predict and plan danger. So we're really trying to make sure we like, our bodies and brains are holding on to information to protect us later. So the body and brain remember. So every instance that you have that's stressful, your brain is remembering it and mapping it down to hold on to it. And the problem is it can hold on to it for a long time, right? Because and so we have to find kind of new ways of learning and understanding, so that we can really regulate ourselves. So when you think of your brain, I think of it like a grass field. So when these situations happen, like when I get that call from the school that there's a really stressful event and I need to be on, it basically creates a path, right? And it's like, if it's a field of grass, like if it happens once, the grass gets tamped down, but it can come back up. If it happens repeatedly over time, which when anyone who's caregiving children with really significant needs, those paths are being worn down because they're happening probably pretty routinely, whether it's you're in the hospital over and over, you're in a doctor's office, or you're in an ER, wherever it is, like, you're mapping down the experience that your child's in danger. And eventually it wears a path in the grass. So it's a well-worn path that kind of can keep firing off. Is this making sense? Is this understood? Okay. So the great part is that it's not concrete. It's not asphalt. Your brain can change. It's grass. You can pick a new path. It's just really hard because this is literally like the air you're breathing every day are your children and their needs. And so it becomes so ingrained that it feels like concrete or asphalt. Like, there were times, like, I remember so clearly, it was just a well-worn path. Like, it was so predictable. Like, I would see the school's number and I would feel, like, you can feel the rush of adrenaline and cortisol and norepinephrine flowing into your body like clockwork. And it just became like second nature to me that it was happening all the time, to be honest. The other piece with trauma that we don't always talk about is it comes with cognitive distortions. The longer this happens, the longer your road is closed and you're kind of so used to taking out these processes, the interpret, process, evaluate, plan, and you're just going straight to act. The longer that happens, the more it also can come with these cognitive distortions. So cognitive distortions are erroneous thoughts and beliefs that lead an individual to perceive events in, I don't like the term inappropriate because it's not inappropriate, it's what's happening, but whatever, in a manner that probably just doesn't feel that great. And sustained trauma can cause cognitive distortion. So you might start to have all or nothing thinking. You might be catastrophizing. Like your child leaves the house and you're like, that's it. I'm going to get a call today. Like, I just know it. Like, I know it's going to happen. You're personalizing things. Like I call it like making moral meaning. Like I used to make moral meaning of everything. Like I'd send my 10 paragraph email and I'd get like a 1-word response. And I'd have I'd have a whole explanation in my head of how, people might not want to help me, or my kid, like they don't like my kids, or I don't know what it was, but like it was erroneous. Like it wasn't true. It was just, I was so stressed and I was constantly stressed for so long, that my brain started to make up different meanings of things. Like the mind reading. Like I would think I would know what Beth was thinking, just sitting there watching me. Thank you, Beth. I can see your face, by the way. So it was really, for me, I think that this was a really powerful kind of piece for me to understand that like the level of stress I was under was causing me to at different points misinterpret the world. Because I was feeling so scared all the time. And I didn't know how to help my own children. That's what it felt like. And I felt like there was a lot of blame and shame attached to that. So the reality is, I love Bessel van der Kolk. If anyone knows Bessel, Dr. van der Kolk, it makes it really understandable. The Body Keeps Score is a great book. So being traumatized means you're continuing to organize your life as if the trauma were still going on. P.S. It is for all of you. So as if it were unchanged and immutable, and as if every new encounter is contaminated by the past. So, once I kind of figured out what was happening for me, I got pretty good about like when I would call like the special ed coordinator, because we'd had a bad week and I was terrified, or something happened at school. I would call and say, I need to be really clear. I know that I'm heightened because I'm in a stress response, but, and because I understood it, I would lead with that to kind of engender some empathy too. Like, I know that I'm struggling, but like, I need you to hear me. Like, I get that you may not see it as a 5-alarm fire and I do, but I need you to kind of listen to me because this is what's happening for me. Like I still feel like this is happening all the time, even when my kids started to get better. So I think that this type of trauma creates a really unique reaction that is different from I'll also name, I worked in residential treatment for years. I worked with a lot of significant trauma, children with significant trauma. And so I feel like I do understand trauma really well, and this has a really unique feel to it for me. So you may feel like you're right back in the crisis. Even it may be really hard when your child starts to get better. Like maybe they have type 1 diabetes and they've really figured out how to negotiate giving themselves insulin and they are okay. But you don't feel like that because you're terrified that something's going to happen all the time. Because that's how your body and brain have kind of mapped down the experience of the level of stress you're under. So it can make it really hard to kind of let go and let children get better. I noticed this acutely when we did get the PANS diagnosis. They started to heal and they both wanted to go back to their public school. And I will never forget, I had to sign the placement page and I was frozen. I was like, no, we are not leaving therapeutic day school. Nope, I don't want to do it. No way. Like my entire body had remembered kind of how painful this was and did not want to move, even though they were ready to go, but I wasn't ready to go because of how, like I just was pickled in a stress response, truthfully. You may be always waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's hard to acknowledge how far they've come. And you may struggle to trust providers and educators. Oh. Okay, so some of the ways that might show up, you might feel sad or scared, you might struggle to trust, You might show up as a mama bear or papa bear. That's what I did. You might be grateful and relieved for, for someone else to take it over. Frozen, responsive. So we've talked a little bit about all the different ways it can show up: fight, flight, or freeze. So why does it look so different or more complicated? So the reality is you didn't just birth yourself at 30 or 25 or 20 or however old you were when you had children. You had a lifetime of experiences before you had children with complex needs. And the reality is you may have had trauma even before this trauma, right? And that's what makes it so complex and layered. So we know 61% of adults have at least one adverse childhood experience, 16% have 4 or more. So when I work with caregivers, I just lead with, this is not the only thing in their life that has been impactful, but this is the most impactful right now. There are socioeconomic barriers that we just have to acknowledge around, does the family have insurance? Can you get to the hospital? Can you find treaters in network? Like all the complicating factors that you all, I'm sure, face daily, just navigating systems. Systemic racism is a huge barrier, and I have a whole slide on it, but it is so significant, the overrepresentation of students of color in our education system, the lack of access to the mental health system, stigma, and we have to be aware of that, obviously, and you all are likely impacted by it. I hear it a lot from students, just the challenges with the level of stress the caregivers are under, and then maybe they've had to call the police, and now they have racial trauma on top of their own trauma. Like it becomes so layered and it's so significant to all of these different pieces to it. So lack of access to providers. You may be struggling if you're dealing with children with mental health needs. You are likely struggling with an access to providers right now, and equitable access to providers, and going along with systemic racism and our lack of culturally competent and appropriate care of having access to providers that look like you or have similar values to you is really significant. Mental health stigma. I can't acknowledge, if you have children with mental health needs, you are likely dealing with stigma. No one's bringing you casseroles when you are in the hospital with your child. It is really significant. There's a great clip I usually play from 60 Minutes, but maybe I can send that separately. It's really good, but mental health stigma is a huge barrier. And then the way I talk about it, you all had to learn new languages. Like I happen to be privileged enough that I was a social worker when my children became ill. So I knew the system. I knew the spoken and the unspoken kind of rules of that system. But most people don't. I was also in special education, so I knew that system. But I think this is a huge barrier. If you have to interface with the medical system, you all know the barriers. I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but it's really hard to challenge doctors, and advocating for yourself and for your children is incredibly stressful sometimes, for sure. The mental health system, it's totally overwhelmed, as we all know. It's not intuitive how to access supports all the time. Crisis intervention can be really challenging. And the treatments, quite frankly, they can take a long time, or they don't work, or they come with side effects. And that's really challenging and stressful as well. The special education system, you all know, is very challenging. So you're talking about having to learn 3 new languages and become experts in all the 3 languages, all the while you're dealing with, this complicated stress response that you're under while you're trying to care for your children. And then I just always acknowledge there's grief and loss. Like it may not be the parenting journey that you were expecting. And you have to acknowledge the grief and loss associated with it, even though it's hard. And that doesn't mean that I've heard professionals say to me, like, no one should feel the grief and loss. Like, it's just, this is their child. And I say, well, I felt grief and loss. I cried a lot. I cried a lot at losing friends, at losing my community, at having to move my children to therapeutic day schools. It is really hard, and it needs to be acknowledged, in my opinion. And so I just want to say that there, I know there's a great poem, that Welcome to Holland poem by Emily Kingsley. Sometimes I use that here. It's interesting. When the first time I did this training for the Federation was years ago, actually, and a parent kind of gave me feedback on that, that poem saying like, it's not like that for everyone. It's not, if anyone knows it, I can share it separately. It's really important to know that everyone's journey is different, and we are all, what I'm saying here today, hopefully it will resonate with some people, and it's different for everyone, and that's okay. Like, we're all just kind of walking through it together, but we need each other. We need to kind of understand how we can support one another. So the healing may not be linear. We talked a little bit about that, and that's really hard. Like, there's just not like your child may not be getting better quickly, fast enough. It may be chronic, it may be sustained. It's really challenging. So here's the thing, and this is why I think this is really important. And I say this to parents when I work with them, when, we're working together for a long time. You are really important. Everyone on this call is so important and valuable, not only to your children, but because you are just amazing humans that deserve to feel better. And ongoing stress causes physical complications. Mental health is physical health. It just is. And so if you have your limbic system and your amygdala firing off sustained for years, you are dumping norepinephrine, cortisol, adrenaline into your body that's not supposed to be there. Like, you are not supposed to be, humans are not supposed to live in a sustained stress response. It's not healthy. There's literature on it. It says, like, the ACEs studies, actually, adverse childhood experience studies, longitudinally, like long-term, it causes pretty significant health issues later in life. So it's really important to kind of really have a reckoning with your own stress response, or I feel like it is. It's really helped me, and it's hard. Your brain learns this way of responding. It's not okay. People shouldn't feel perpetually unsafe in their world. They just shouldn't. And it's complicated, but it's important to really find ways through it. And I know people talked about impact to relationships. It's huge. You and your partner may have, if you're fortunate enough to have a partner, because I have dear friends who are single moms and single dads, and that is a journey that is so challenging, and you need so much support. If you're lucky or you're fortunate enough to have a partner, you may have an incongruent stress response with your partner. Like, you may be a fighter, your partner may be a freezer, and now what do you do? Because now you're probably both in these heightened, kind of trauma responses, and you can't communicate anymore, because you have different stress responses. And you may be really isolated. So these are just some other quotes. I'm gonna get through it in 45 minutes, I promise you. And then I'll answer, we can get to the questions. But I think just some really powerful kind of quotes from caregivers that I've heard through the years. It's so hard. And I think when we do our caregiver trauma group, I think the relief caregivers feel when they are able to realize that, like, it's okay to care for themselves too. And they really are deserving of feeling better. Like, we deserve to feel better. So how do we do that? I won't sit on this slide, but you'll see it when you get it in the PDF. So why is it so hard? It's just hard. I'm just going to say it's hard to kind of figure out how you have your own personal reckoning with your stress response. I think there's a lot of shame attached to it. I always come back to this slide because regulating your nervous system means we humans need to be in connection with other people. And that is actually the way I found my way through, was I found my way to my special ed parent advisory council in my community. And those women and other parents, but it was mainly women that I worked with, really saved me, to be honest. They saw me, they cared for me, and they let me have my stress responses. They let me just be me. And they normalized that what I was going through was not, it was not deserving of being as isolated as I had ended up. So we have to find connection. People had asked about, like, can you please give me some actual tools as opposed to, like, go get some coping skills, because that's really hard. And I find that it is this particular type of stress and trauma actually requires, you need other people to feel connected and to feel grounded again. And it is the hardest thing to do. It was so hard for me to get out of my house and go meet other people, and I had to. It was, and I had a pretty good support system before. And truthfully, most of them left when my kids were so sick. So I had to rebuild. So these are just some good supports that I found. I did not really know about the Department of Children with Special Health Needs. You all probably do. I'm actually sit on the advisory council for the PANDAS Advisory Council with Elaine Gabovich, who's the head of that. They have some great resources, but just anything you can do to connect yourself in. Remembering how important you are so valuable, not only to your children, but to the rest of the world. And to yourself, you are really deserving of feeling better. I think part of what complicates this conversation always is people have a lot of shame about, like, they should be doing more, we could be doing more, I should be able to save my child. And the reality is you are doing the best you can with what you have and the resources you have, and you have to be kind to yourself. Oh, there's my cat crying in the background. That's amazing. Identifying your stress response is really important. Hopefully people are able to do that through this training. I always say, name it, detain it, call it out. Like, I started to get much better when I just started saying, like, I think I'm really stuck in a stress response right now, but I'm really going to ask you to listen to me and help me through it. And when I call it out for other caregivers, I can see the relief in their face when I say, like, are you okay? Do you need something? Like, how can I help support you? And it just builds a bridge. Being kind to yourself, using words that are kind, not harsh, not saying I should do this or should do that, but you are doing the best you can. And one of in our 10-week trauma group, we do this kind of idea of this using really positive talk and changing the narrative and the script that you're using with yourself. So I've replaced all buts with ands. My child is very sick and I'm doing the best I can. Things seem really bleak now, and I'm going to ask for help from others. Asking for help from others was probably the hardest thing I ever had to do, and I wasn't really good at it. It was my biggest weakness, and I learned pretty quick. And I will tell you, my children, I swear, are alive today because of other parents. Because I just kept reaching out and saying, like, what do I do? I don't know what to do. Does anyone have any ideas? And when I started doing that and changing my language and my mindset, things fell into place, truthfully, for me. I'm not saying that happens to everyone, but it happened. That was my story. Externalizing the anxiety. This isn't who you are. This is, your child is ill. How do you giving your stress response a name? It's what we do for the kids we work with as well. It's called narrative therapy. All right, I'm almost done. Trying not to accommodate it, but pushing back on it. So, like, when I was frozen and didn't want to sign the placement page, I pushed back on it. I did the opposite. It was really hard because my entire body was telling me, like, absolutely not. They're not going back to public school. And my kids were saying, I want that. And I had to do the opposite and step into the discomfort and retrain that brain, that grass field. I had to pick a different path in the grass field. You can do that. It's just really hard. We talk about pilot's checklist, just every morning getting up and, no, he didn't land in the Hudson, because on the first try, like, he practiced building skills. So he knew that's the Miracle on the Hudson plane. So, like, every day waking up, maybe it's on your phone, and kind of having a mantra for yourself and really being able to reset and ground yourself, practicing it daily. And I think we have to acknowledge the grief and loss. That's one of the weeks in the trauma group as well. Journaling, writing a trauma narrative, and allowing time and space to feel the pain and heal. And then coping skills. See, I got there in there. I put the coping skills in that are really important as well. And then I'll just end with that. I love that quote. It's like my favorite quote. I see your pain and it's big. I see your courage and it's bigger, and you can do hard things. So, okay. So I raced through it. I hope that was understandable. I hope you'll ask questions if it's not. I try to have a lot of intellectual humility. I don't know everything. So
Well, and looking in the chat, there are a lot of people who are appreciating you naming it, and there are a few who feel like you've probably been sitting in their living room and are replaying their lives. And there are a couple of questions that have come out, but at the very least, this is all resonating with people. And of course, there are people here who feel as though they're challenged with children who are very angry, and they're having to manage that in addition to their own trauma. And how do you do that? There was one point that you made earlier about finding your village or getting help from others. And one person asked the question, what if there is nobody else? There's no family, there's no friends, there's nobody around that they've been able to identify. So how do you push beyond that to find those people? Where do you look? What are the skills that you need to get past that point?
So I think and one of my children was very externalized in their presentation, and very, made a lot of rage and a lot of outbursts, and it was incredibly shaming and painful as a parent, particularly when, and I write about it. I have a Psychology Today blog. I've written about it, so it's out there. I've kind of exposed myself with it. But when we had to call the police, when we realized our neighbors had called the police on us, and how painful and isolating it is to be that alone. And I think what I would say is I don't ever want to discount and invalidate that you don't have anyone. And I think there are people out there who get it. Like, I get that. It's awful. It's actually awful. It is, like, I literally started walking around my neighborhood saying, I'm sorry. Like, I don't know what else to do. Can you help me? I don't know what's happening in my house. Like, so I think there are lots of different ways. I mean, for me, the Federation and my local CPAC was huge. I know Mary Viano's on here tonight, and PPAL, PPAL, it's called PAL. Sorry, I say PPAL because there are two P's, but it's really PAL.
I do the same. Yeah,
they are an amazing resource. Mary and I did a training together at one point, and I mean, she's just amazing, and that whole team is amazing. So I do believe there are people who really do understand and have been through that level of kind of chaos and trauma. So,
can you also talk about some other resources that might be out there? One person mentioned a 10-week trauma group. Are there other places or support groups that people might be able to tap into? Perhaps some of the folks who haven't been able to identify people to support them. Would that be a place they could go to?
Yeah, so that we bridged in with Dearborn actually bridged in with Stanford University, who had created a trauma group for PANS PANDAS, but quite frankly, PANS PANDAS is mental health, but and so they were the people doing the research on caregiver burden index and PANS. So that's how we got that trauma group. Truthfully, they're not happening enough. So I would say we need to be doing a lot more work as our systems, whether it's to put those in place, because I don't know a lot of them. I think PAL is probably the biggest resource for mental health. I do know the DPH group that has a hotline as well. And then I also kind of wonder, Massachusetts has poured millions of dollars, certainly into the mental health, and behavioral health, which I struggle with the term behavioral health, but I won't go into that right now. It's just hard for me. It kind of implies shame and blame of your behaviors are off, and maybe anyway. But they've put so much money into it. There are behavioral health lines. There are community health centers. I think we have to start using them. We have to reuse the resources we have. There's DMH, there's DDS. How do we really lean in and ask for help when we need it?
Yeah, you had mentioned the Division for Children and Youth with Special Health Needs, which Elaine Gabovich is my partner in crime over there. The community support line is another place. If you do, it's 800-882-1435. And we'll put it in the chat for you, but that there is a place there where any question that you have, including where can I find a support group to help me with this, people were there to help. Of course, at the Federation, we have Family Ties. and PPAL and Mass Family Voices. We have a number of resources that are available. Thank you, KP, NAMI, AME, DDS. There's and even with the Family Ties online resource book, the pink book we used to call it affectionately, there were places there that you can find resources as well. And of course, yes, I was about to, shamelessly plug the Caregiver to Caregiver Respite Network. Thank you for that, Melanie. Just because, ironically, the Caregiver to Caregiver Respite Network, for those who may not be familiar with it, is kind of a respite exchange program where caregivers of children with similar support needs are matched with other caregivers to provide each other support. And many people struggle with this idea sometimes because it's like, I don't have the energy to possibly give, but I need someone to help me. But the challenge with that, of course, is then you don't actually move forward. And there are a number of people who have had the benefit of the program. And one of the things they came out with was, in addition to just getting the respite, they had somebody else who understood. They had somebody else to talk to. So, and the entire family system was impacted, not just the primary caregiver, but the children themselves. If I suddenly had new friends, even the fathers, perish the thought, were able to hook up on this. So, it's one potential solution for this as well. And then even plugging into the parent-to-parent program that's at the Federation, which just being able to be matched with somebody else with the same lived expertise and understanding, what do I do next? I have no idea, because we all know sometimes your best resources out there for us are others just like us, right? Why reinvent the wheel? Melanie, you've had your hand up for a few minutes, so I didn't want you to think I was ignoring you. It's just there was a lot to get out.
Thank you, Beth. No, I know you would never ignore folks. I just wanted to say thank you, Sheilah. And I think this is a really important reason that we wanted to bring this conversation around trauma forward and caregiver trauma forward, because it's not talked about often enough, really. And I really appreciated what you were saying around the isolation aspect of it, and the isolation aspect around a lot of the behavior that can come as a result of some of the mental health and behavioral health needs. And certainly we experienced that, like in the school, we were had always been really involved in the school, and then suddenly the school, our own community, was kind of turning against us, or it felt like they were turning against us, if you will, because it was like, we don't want that kid in our classroom, and sort of that isolation and the way that can feel. So I think that's really important to name it and to help people understand that, because of the shame, and again, how it can bring up your own childhood trauma. I mean, I think this was all really so critical, and I appreciate the presentation. And I think also Mary has been really so receptive when we have families that, and Pal has been so receptive when we have families that, they feel like there's nowhere else to go, because, I heard what you said about the behavioral health and not liking that because it feels like it's, there's a fault line in there. The behavior is sort of the issue. And I think also people see mental health, the term mental health, is stigma. There's a stigma people feel attached to that. So I sort of was more comfortable with behavioral health because, just everybody has their own stuff, right?
Totally.
So,
Yeah.
but that's, I think, part of the issue is that because we're not talking about brain health as health, right? It's sort of this stigmatized aspect to it, right? And we all have brain health, right? We all have brain health needs. Nobody escapes that, no matter what the situation is. It doesn't just have to be trauma, but it's all those things, and thinking more healthy and stuff like that. So I like the sort of being able to really talk about it. And that's why we wanted you here. So we really appreciate you doing that. And I want to see more of this. So we'll have to figure out how we can do this some more as well, Sheilah. So just want to really thank you. And thank you, Beth, for the facilitation.
Of course. So we only have another minute or two left. Apparently, KP Marshall has put in a link to a series that's being presented by JRI, Caregiver Connection Series. That sounds amazing. So, one of the things that I've always said, I've been affiliated with the Federation for double-digit numbers of years now, and a couple of decades, actually. And I often have introduced the Federation as the one-stop shop for anything related to special health needs. So if you are struggling with finding resources to support you in your journey, start here. We have so many people here who are so willing and able to provide support to you and help you to identify resources that will work for you. And also, a lot of that comes from their own lived expertise and experience and being caregivers themselves. So really wanting to make sure that people understand there are resources out there, and we are willing to partner with you to do that. Is there anybody who has one? I think we have time for maybe one last question that we might be able to answer real quickly before we need to close out for the evening.
Just in the comment section, Beth, Mary made a
I
quick
do.
comment.
I have
What
a
was-
question too.
Okay, yes, I can't see who's speaking, but yes, what is
It's
your
Jenny.
question?
It's Jenny.
Hi,
Sorry.
Jenny. Hey, Jenny.
My question is, I mean, it's sort of personal, but I'm sure some of you feel the same, but let's see. When it comes to discipline, let's say, for instance, my son, he has to go out with his big brother, right? He doesn't need me to wake him up. He'll be ready. But when it's time to go to church, when it's time to go to school, I have to wake him up every single morning. Now I decided not to. Hi, Mommy. Hi, that's him. Okay, he's gone. Thank God. So now I decided not to wake him up anymore. The bus comes at 6:25. This morning, it was 6:10. He was still sleeping. And I had to get up, go wake him up, and help him out to get out of it because I felt guilty if I let him stay home. What is the school going to say to me? You know you have a child with special needs. Why would you do that? Is it true? Is it not true? Have any of you experienced that? Is it okay to, do that so he can learn about things that are important? Or is it bad on my part to do that because he has special needs?
That's a
It's-
loaded question.
It's such a complicated question,
Yeah.
right? Like, because just you probably need to know, what the disability was, like I mean, I think what's really hard is, I mean, I guess I lead with kids do well if they can. So I think, it's hard because you want them to learn those kind of I call them natural consequences of, like, if you sleep in, you don't go to school. But it's such a tricky balance because school is actually, like, if you remember that slide I had of polyvagal theory, like, school is where they get the social engagement and connection, right? Like, so it's hard. It's probably more of a benefit for them to get to school, even though it's hard. So it's such a balance. I mean, sometimes they can learn it by the natural consequence, but other times, they really can't. And that's kind of our role, is to make sure they're up and moving and kind of in that routine, So that's a challenging question. Maybe you have a better answer, Beth.
I'm sure I don't, but what I would add to that, and you may have already thought of this, Jenny, is have you had a conversation with the school to partner with you on trying to figure this out?
Yeah.
Because if they're aware of the fact that you're doing that, there may be ways to incorporate that into the IEP, and in that way, also if there is a morning where it's happening, people have already been put on notice, so you're not doing it in isolation. And I think very often we as caregivers of kids with special needs are so used to doing it on our own, and sometimes don't have time to bring other people in because we're just so busy dealing with the things that are being fired at us constantly, that we often forget that there may be others who can partner with us in it. So that may be part of the solution. And I think, this may be an occasion where calling into the Federation and talking with someone who can get a little bit more detail about all of the pieces to this, we would be able to partner with you in discovering what the correct approach might be.
Thank you. I must say I work for the Federation. I just don't know that answer.
Okay. Well, you have a whole team of people around that I would be tapping into and wringing dry at this point. All right. Well, yes. Well, thank you for bringing that question up, because I can tell you as a special education advocate, it comes up a lot. And that's one of the reasons why I suggested partnering with your team, because I think that often having other people be there with you and understanding what you're dealing with every day often makes it a little bit easier. It doesn't always, but it's a good place to start. That is why we have a team.
Yes.
So I wish you the best on this, and look forward to hearing the rest of the story. But we are coming up on 6 o'clock. My goodness, this time flew. And Sheilah, we so appreciate your being here, raising this issue. yeah, I found myself listening to you and going, yep, 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 yeah, oh, that so resonates. And the idea that because you're a parent, it's just assumes you're going to do this. So nobody really thinks about the fact that we are literally dealing with trauma from the time we get up in the morning to the time we go to sleep. And I remember, and the mantra for me going to bed was just thanking God I made it through the day and trusting him that I was going to get through the next one. So it absolutely resonates. So thank you so much for this, at the very least for validating the experiences that we have and naming it and giving us a place to talk about it. As we move forward, folks, there are so many other resources that the Federation has available to you. There is a Planning a Life conference coming up on October 25th and 26th. The 25th is virtual, and the 26th, you're invited to come in person at the Schraff Center where the Federation is housed. So you can find that information on the website. There is also a boatload of other trainings that are available on the website. So if you go to the calendar, you will find that. And then one of my favorite events every year is the Visions of Community Conference that is scheduled for March 8th. 2025. Yes, that may seem like that's far away, and we all know we're going to blink and it's going to be here, but it's one of my favorite events because everybody there understands it. We get it because we're all walking in it together. I used to call it the homecoming of families with kids with disabilities. It will be virtual again this year. So if you're not able to go somewhere, it's okay. You can walk yourself up those stairs or across the room to your computer, and you'll be able to participate in. And anything you can't participate in, the workshop recordings and PowerPoints will be available for, I believe it's a good 3 months afterwards. So you'll have that as an ongoing resource. So again, thank you, Sheilah, for joining us tonight. It's always such a wonderful experience to have you with us. And we will have to make sure we bring you back again because this clearly resonates with everybody. And thank you all for joining us this evening. And please remember, again, the Federation is here to support you in so many different ways. And even if you don't think they can, trust me when I tell you, if they don't have the answer, they will find it and get it back to you. So take time to reach out. And thank you again for joining us. Be safe and please take care of yourselves, including calling the Federation. Did I mention that? All right. Have a wonderful evening, folks.
Thank you.